a story about a legend from Rome, Gaius Octavius. For that, let's take a few moments to detach from the hustle and bustle of the outside world and turn inward. Find the most comfortable position for you right now. You can sit in a chair with your back straight but still relaxed, or lie down comfortably. Make sure your body is well supported. Chapter 1. The Boy from Velletri, the provincial roots of a future emperor. While Gaius Octavius, the man who would become the Emperor Augustus, was born in the heart of Rome in 63 BCE, his paternal heritage and a significant part of his upbringing were firmly rooted in the provincial town of Velletri, located on the slopes of the Alban Hills southeast of Rome. Velletri was an ancient Volscian settlement that had been integrated into the Roman world. For the future emperor, it represented his family's respectable yet not traditionally powerful equestrian origins. The Octavia of Velletri were a wealthy and prominent family in their local town. Having amassed their fortune through banking, they were what Romans would consider numen novi homines, individuals whose families were not part of the long-established patrician aristocracy in Rome, but had risen to senatorial rank through their own efforts. Octavian's father, also named Gaius Octavius, was the first in the family to become a Roman senator and had a distinguished career, serving as praetor and governor of Macedonia, a formative upbringing shaped by family and fortune. Octavian's early life was marked by both privilege and personal loss. His father died when he was only 4 years old. Subsequently, he was raised primarily by his grandmother Julia Minor, who was the sister of none other than Gaius Julius Caesar. This maternal connection to the illustrious Julian clan would prove to be the single most decisive factor in his destiny. While spending his formative years in Velletri, at his family's various estates, Octavian received a comprehensive education, typical for a Roman aristocrat. He was schooled in Latin and Greek rhetoric and philosophy, preparing him for a life in public service. His upbringing, therefore, was a blend of the solid provincial values of his paternal lineage and the powerful metropolitan influence of his Julian connections, the Velletri connection and political identity. Octavian's origins in Velletri were more than just a biographical detail. They played a role in his political narrative in the turbulent years after Caesar's assassination. As the young heir navigated a treacherous political landscape filled the established Roman nobles, his provincial background could be framed as an asset. It allowed him to present himself as a man of the Italian people, distinct from the sometimes decadent and out-of-touch aristocracy of the capital. While his opponents might have looked down on his family's comparatively modest non-Roman origins, Octavian's immense wealth, his adoption by Caesar, and his own political genius quickly overshadowed any perceived social disadvantages. His story became one of merit and destiny, of a boy from a well-regarded municipal family who rose to the pinnacle of power, not solely through birthright in the traditional Roman sense, but through the divine will of the deified Julius Caesar and his own exceptional abilities. The boy from Velletri, through a combination of inheritance, ambition, and ruthless intelligence, would ultimately transform the Roman Republic into an empire and himself into its first and greatest emperor. Chapter 2. The Shadow of a Titan. Octavian, forging an empire from the shadow of a Titan. Gaius Octavius, a young man of respectable but not stellar lineage, was thrust from relative obscurity into the heart of Roman power politics by the last will and testament of his great-uncle Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. The assassination of the dictator did not extinguish his monumental influence. Instead, it cast a long and formidable shadow over Rome, a shadow in which his 18-year-old heir would have to learn to walk, fight, and ultimately rule. For much of his early career, Octavian was not his own man, but a figure defined by his connection to the fallen titan of spectral presence. He would masterfully manipulate to forge his own lasting empire. At the moment of Caesar's death, Octavian was a student in Apollonia, a provincial city in modern-day Albania. He possessed a respectable name and a fine education, but he was not a significant player on the Roman stage. It was Caesar's will that changed everything, adopting the boy as his son and making him heir to his immense fortune and, more importantly, his name, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. This inheritance was both a golden ticket and a crushing burden. The name Caesar was a source of immense power, commanding the fierce loyalty of the dictator's veteran legions. and the love of the Roman plebs. However, it also meant that Octavian's every move would be measured against the legacy of a military genius and a beloved, if controversial leader. He was, in essence, the shadow of a god. His rivals, seasoned and powerful men like the famed General Mark Antony, initially saw him as such a mere boy, a political ghost riding on the coattails of a dead man. Antony, who had been Caesar's right-hand man, felt he was the natural successor and publicly belittled the young heir. But Octavian, though physically frail and lacking Caesar's military prowess, possessed a cunning, patience, and ruthlessness that few anticipated. He understood that the shadow was his greatest weapon. He immediately traveled to Italy and, against the advice of many, accepted his perilous inheritance. He raised funds, distributed the money promised to the people, and Caesar's was something Antony had neglected, and constantly emphasized his unique position as Divi Filius, the son of the divine. After Caesar was formally deified in 42 BCE, his propaganda was relentless and brilliant. Every speech, every coin minted, every public appearance reinforced his connection to the beloved martyr. He was not just a man seeking power. He was a son avenging his father and fulfilling his divine destiny. This narrative was central to his conflict with Mark Antony. The struggle for supremacy after they, along with Lepidus, defeated Caesar's assassins was framed by Octavian as a battle for the true inheritance of Caesar's legacy, while Antony, based in the opulent East with Cleopatra, was portrayed as having abandoned Roman values. Octavian positioned himself in Italy as the stoic defender of tradition and the true heir to Caesar's vision for Rome. He was the shadow that remained loyal, while Antony was the one who had strayed from the light. The final victory at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BCE was the climax of this struggle. By defeating Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian vanquished his last rival for control of Caesar's legacy. He had not just won a civil war, he had successfully claimed the shadow as his own. But to truly rule, Octavian knew he had to do more than simply inhabit the ghost of the past. He had to step out from the shadow and cast his own. Upon his return to Rome, he masterfully orchestrated a transition from the chaotic republic to a stable, autocratic regime. In 27 BCE, in a show of calculated modesty, he restored power to the Senate and the people of Rome. In return, a grateful Senate bestowed upon him the new sacred name Augustus. This was the final, brilliant act of political maneuvering. While Caesar would remain a potent family name, Augustus was something new, a title suggesting religious authority and revered status. Untainted by the civil wars that had marred his predecessor's rise, he had used the shadow of the Titan to achieve supreme power, and then created a new light under which to govern. He would rule for over 40 years, not as a dictator like Caesar, but as princeps or first citizen, ushering in the Pax Romana, an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. The boy who started as a mere echo of a great man had successfully used that echo to amplify his own voice, creating a legacy that would define the Roman Empire for centuries to come. Chapter 3, A Dangerous Inheritance. Octavian's perilous legacy, a dangerous inheritance. When Julius Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March 44 BCE, his last will and testament unleashed a political firestorm that would consume the Roman Republic. At the heart of this inferno was his named heir, Gaius Octavius, a grandnephew who was then just an 18-year-old student undergoing military training in Apollonia. The inheritance thrust upon him was not merely a portfolio of properties and a vast fortune. It was a legacy so potent and perilous that it marked him for either supreme power or a swift and brutal death. The inheritance, a name more powerful than gold. The most dangerous part of Octavian's inheritance was not the immense wealth, but the adoption and the name he was granted, Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. In a society driven by patronage and loyalty, the name Caesar was the single most powerful asset in Rome. It commanded the unwavering devotion of Caesar's veteran legions, the most formidable military force in the world, and the adoration of the Roman plebeian class, who had benefited from Caesar's populist reforms. However, this name was also a target to the senatorial elite and the self-proclaimed liberators led by Brutus and Cassius. The name Caesar was synonymous with tyranny and the death of the Republic. By accepting the inheritance, Octavian was not just claiming a fortune, he was declaring his allegiance to the legacy of a man they had murdered to preserve their power. He immediately became the living embodiment of everything they had sought to destroy, a landscape of predators. The Rome to which Octavian returned was a treacherous landscape populated by seasoned and ruthless political predators, the most formidable. These was Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general and consul at the time of the assassination. Antony viewed himself as Caesar's rightful political successor and saw the young, untested Octavian as an impudent upstart. He initially seized Caesar's papers and treasury, refusing to hand them over and treating the young heir with open contempt. Antony had the military experience, the political connections, and the immediate power in Rome, making him an immediate and dangerous rival. Simultaneously, the assassins of Caesar still commanded legions in the eastern provinces. They represented a mortal threat, as Octavian, by virtue of his name, was honor-bound to avenge his adoptive father's murder. This placed him in direct opposition to a powerful faction of the Roman aristocracy, caught between the Caesarian loyalists, who demanded vengeance, and the powerful republicans who wanted him dead. Octavian had no safe harbor, a gamble with no middle ground. Octavian's decision to accept the inheritance was an audacious gamble. His own stepfather, Lucius Marcius Philippus, advised him to reject it for his own safety. To do so would have meant a life of quiet, wealthy obscurity. To accept, however, is to enter a high-stakes game with no middle ground. There was no path where he could simply be a private citizen. Named Caesar, the name was too charged, the legacy too demanding. He was immediately forced to navigate a minefield, financial ruin. To cement the loyalty of the people and the soldiers, he was obligated to pay the cash legacy Caesar had promised in his will. When Antony withheld the funds, Octavian took a massive risk, selling off his own inherited properties to raise the money, a move that earned him immense popular support, but put him in a precarious financial position. Military confrontation lacking an army of his own, he used the power of his name to poach legions from Antony's command, a bold move that triggered an inevitable military conflict. His early alliance with the Senate to fight Antony in the Battle of Mutina was a masterstroke of manipulation, but it forced him to partner with men like Cicero, who fundamentally distrusted him. Constant betrayal in the ensuing chaos, alliances were fleeting and betrayal was common. Octavian's formation of the Second Triumvirate with Antony and Lepidus was a pact of convenience to eliminate their shared enemies. It led to brutal proscriptions, a fresh wave of civil war, and the understanding that eventually the triumvirs would have to turn on each other. Octavian's inheritance was dangerous because it offered no safety. It thrust him into the center of a power vacuum where military might, political cunning, and sheer ruthlessness were the only currencies that mattered. He inherited a legacy that forced him onto a path of vengeance and ambition, a path where the only possible outcomes were a bloody death or total dominion over the entire Roman world. His genius lay in recognizing this perilous reality and navigating it with a skill that belied his age and experience. Chapter 4, The Triumvirate of Vengeance. Following the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, his heir Octavian, along with Mark Antony and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, formed a powerful and ruthless alliance known as the Second Triumvirate. Its primary and most pressing goal was vengeance, the complete and brutal annihilation of the men who had conspired to kill Caesar, a pact forged in blood and ambition. The formation of the Second Triumvirate in 43 BCE was not an alliance of friends, but a pact of necessity between rivals. After a period of intense political maneuvering and military conflict against each other, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus recognized that their common enemies, the so-called liberators led by Marcus Junius, Brutus, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, posed a greater immediate threat. Their alliance was officially legitimized by the Roman state through the Lex Titia, a law that granted the trio supreme authority for 5 years. Unlike the informal First Triumvirate of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, this new pact was a formal military dictatorship. Their shared mission was clear: hunt down and destroy the assassins of Caesar, who had fled to the eastern provinces and amassed a significant army, the proscriptions, a reign of terror, before they could march east. The triumvirate sought to consolidate their power in Italy and eliminate any potential enemies at home. They initiated a terrifying and systematic campaign of political purges known as the proscriptions. Lists of public enemies were posted in the Roman Forum, offering bounties for their heads and confiscating their property. This was vengeance on a grand scale, while ostensibly targeting those connected to Caesar's murder. The proscriptions also served to eliminate political opponents and fill the triumvirate's war chest with seized assets. Thousands of wealthy senators and equestrians were executed, including the great orator Cicero, whose sharp tongue and political opposition to Mark Antony sealed his fate. This brutal act not only silenced dissent but also sent a chilling message of the triumvirate's absolute and merciless power. The Battle of Philippi, vengeance realized. With their power in Italy secured, the triumvirate's legions marched east to confront the armies of Brutus and Cassius. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia in 42 BCE. The fighting occurred into separate engagements. In first battle, Antony's forces defeated Cassius, who, misinformed about the state of the battle and believing all was lost, ordered his own freedmen to kill him. In the second engagement a few weeks later, the combined forces of Antony and Octavian overwhelmed Brutus's army. Defeated and facing capture, Brutus famously committed suicide. The victory at Philippi was the culmination of the triumvirate's quest for vengeance, with the leaders of the conspiracy dead. Caesar's murder had been avenged in the eyes of his loyalists and the Roman people. For Octavian, the Divi Filius, son of the divine, this victory was a crucial step. It solidified his standing as the rightful heir who had fulfilled his pious duty to his adoptive father, paving the way for his eventual bloody ascent to sole ruler of the Roman world. Chapter 5, A Shifting Alliance. Octavian and the Triumvirate, a shifting alliance of ambition and betrayal. In the chaotic aftermath of Julius Caesar's assassination, a fragile and ultimately doomed alliance was forged out of a mutual need for survival and a shared thirst for vengeance. The Second Triumvirate, a formal pact established in 43 BCE between the young heir Octavian, veteran general Mark Antony, and the wealthy patrician Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, was from its inception a volatile union of powerful men. For Octavian, this shifting alliance was a treacherous path he had to navigate with cunning, ruthlessness, and an uncanny ability to turn on his allies when they were no longer useful. The alliance of necessity, uniting against a common foe. Initially, Octavian and Mark Antony were bitter rivals. Antony, Caesar's most prominent lieutenant, viewed the 19-year-old heir with contempt, seeing him as an obstacle to his own ambitions. Their initial power struggles led to open warfare. However, the rise of a common enemy, the armies of Caesar's assassins, Brutus and Cassius, forced their rivals into a pragmatic and bloody partnership. With Lepidus serving as a mediating figure, the three men formed the triumvirate for organizing the Republic. Their first act was brutal and unified: the proscriptions. Together, they unleashed a reign of terror in Rome, legally murdering thousands of senators and wealthy citizens, including the famed orator Cicero. This act served a dual purpose. It eliminated their political enemies in Italy and filled their war chest with confiscated wealth. With their rear secured, they marched east and, as a united force, achieved their primary goal of vengeance at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, where the armies of Brutus and Cassius were crushed. The cracks appear, sidelining Lepidus. With their common enemy vanquished, the inherent distrust among the triumvirs began to surface. The vast Roman world was carved up among them, and he took the clamorous and wealthy east, Octavian the challenging and difficult west, including Italy, and Lepidus was given Africa. Lepidus was always the junior partner. Octavian skillfully worked to sideline him. The opportunity came in 36 BCE during the revolt of Sextus Pompey, the son of Pompey the Great, who controlled Sicily and threatened Rome's grain supply. After a difficult campaign, Lepidus brought his legions from Africa to Sicily, but then made a critical error. He demanded that the defeated legions of Sextus swear allegiance to him, a move Octavian interpreted as a power grab in a display of audacious political theater. Octavian entered Lepidus's camp unarmed and appealed directly to the soldiers, using his status as Caesar's son. The legions, seeing more promise with the young Caesar than with Lepidus, defected en masse. Stripped of his military and political power, Lepidus was forced into exile, reduced from a ruler of a third of the Roman world to a political non-entity. The triumvirate of three was now a tense duality of two. The final break, propaganda and war against Antony. The final act of the shifting alliance was the inevitable clash between Octavian and Antony. For years, their rivalry simmered. Octavian, based in Rome, masterfully waged a propaganda war against his distant rival. He depicted Antony as a man who had gone native, corrupted by the decadent luxury of the East and bewitched by the foreign queen, Cleopatra of Egypt. Octavian portrayed himself as the champion of Roman tradition and virtue, while Antony was cast as an Eastern despot who planned to move the capital of the Roman Empire to Alexandria and subordinate Rome to Egypt. The final straw came when Octavian illegally seized Antony's will from the Temple of Vesta and read it to the Senate. But what confirmed Roman fears, it made lavish bequests to his children with Cleopatra, and requested that he be buried in Alexandria. Public outrage, skillfully stoked by Octavian, was immense. He declared war not on Antony, a fellow Roman, which would have meant another civil war, but on Cleopatra. This framed the conflict as a defense of Rome against a foreign threat. The shifting alliance had fully dissolved into open hostility. The conflict culminated in 31 BCE at the naval battle of Actium. Octavian's forces, commanded by the brilliant general Marcus Agrippa, decisively defeated the combined fleets of Antony and Cleopatra. A year later, the lovers committed suicide. The alliance, born in the shadow of Caesar's death, had ended with Octavian standing alone, the undisputed master of the Roman world, ready to refashion it into his own image as the Emperor Augustus. Chapter 6, Actium. The die is cast. Actium, 31 BCE. For Octavian, the die is cast. The phrase "the die is cast" famously belongs to Octavian's adoptive father, Julius Caesar, who uttered it as he crossed the Rubicon River, making civil war inevitable. For Octavian himself, the Battle of Actium was his Rubicon. It was the final, irreversible gamble in a decade-long power struggle, a single naval engagement on which the entire future of Rome hinged. The clash in the waters off the western coast of Greece on September 2nd, 31 BCE, was not merely a battle. It was the casting of a die that would determine the fate of a republic and forge an empire. Point of no return, the lead up to Actium, was a masterclass in political maneuvering and propaganda by Octavian. The tense peace of the Second Triumvirate had long since fractured, while Mark Antony, Caesar's acclaimed general, established his power base in the wealthy East with the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. Octavian remained in Rome, skillfully painting himself as the defender of Roman tradition. He cast Antony not as a fellow Roman, but as a man bewitched by a foreign queen, a despot who had abandoned his heritage. The breaking point came when Octavian illegally seized Antony's will from the Temple of Vesta and read it aloud to the Senate. Contents were political poison, lavish territorial gifts to Cleopatra's children, and, most damningly, a request to be buried beside her in Alexandria, not Rome. Public outrage, expertly fanned by Octavian, was immense. By forcing the Senate to declare war not on the respected Antony but on the foreign sorceress Cleopatra, Octavian framed the conflict as a defense of Rome itself. There was no turning back. The propaganda had been unleashed, the legal declarations made, and the legions mobilized. The die was cast, and war was the only possible outcome. The decisive gamble, Antony and Cleopatra gathered a massive fleet and army at Actium. Their ships were colossal, designed as floating fortresses, but they were heavy and difficult to maneuver. Antony, a brilliant land commander, found himself blockaded and outmaneuvered at sea by Octavian's brilliant and innovative Admiral Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Agrippa's fleet consisted of smaller, lighter, and more agile Liburnian warships. His strategy was one of attrition and containment. He cut off Antony's supply lines, and disease and desertion began to cripple Antony's forces, who were effectively trapped in the Ambracian Gulf. Forced into action, Antony's plan was not to win a decisive victory, but to break through the blockade and escape to Egypt to regroup. On the day of the battle, his massive quinqueremes rode out to meet Agrippa's swarming fleet. The battle was a chaotic clash of styles. Agrippa's ships darted around the larger vessels, using their mobility to harass and isolate them, raining down projectiles from a safe distance. The turning point was sudden and dramatic. For reasons still debated by historians, Cleopatra, commanding a squadron of 60 Egyptian ships held in reserve, suddenly broke from the battle and fled for the open sea. Seeing her departure, Antony abandoned his flagship, boarded a smaller, faster vessel and pursued her, leaving the bulk of his fleet without its commander. Demoralized and confused, the remainder of Antony's forces fought on. But with their leadership gone, the battle turned into a rout. One by one, the leaderless squadron surrendered. The aftermath, a new world order Antony's gamble to break out had failed catastrophically. He had lost not only the battle, but also his reputation as a commander who stood by his men. His flight sealed his fate. The victory at Actium was total and absolute. Octavian pursued the couple to Alexandria the following year. Faced with the inevitable, Antony and Cleopatra took their own lives. With their deaths, Octavian was left as the sole, undisputed master of the Roman world. The consequences of this victory were monumental. The end of the Republic, the decades of brutal civil wars that had torn the Roman Republic apart were finally over. The annexation of Egypt, the last of the great Hellenistic kingdoms, fell, and its immense wealth flowed into Rome's treasury, allowing Octavian to pay his veterans and secure his power. The birth of the empire. Octavian returned to Rome not as a conqueror, but as a restorer of peace. In 27 BCE, the Senate bestowed upon him the honorific title Augustus. He had won the war, and now he would win the peace, establishing the constitutional framework for the Roman Empire that would endure for centuries. At Actium, the die was truly cast. The battle was the violent culmination of a series of irreversible choices that destroyed the old order. Octavian's victory was not just a military triumph. It was the event that extinguished the last vestiges of the Roman Republic and laid the foundation for the Pax Romana, with him as its first and greatest emperor. Chapter 7, the architect of the Principate. For decades of brutal civil war that shattered the Roman Republic, Octavian, now bearing the new, revered name Augustus, faced a monumental challenge: how to govern a vast empire without appearing to be a king, a title the Romans despised. His solution was a political masterpiece of subtlety and strength known as the Principate, a system he carefully designed to concentrate power in his hands, while maintaining the illusion of the old republic. In doing so, he became its chief architect, building a new political order on the ruins of the old, but republican facade. Augustus understood that the senators and people of Rome would never accept an overt monarchy. Therefore, his guiding principle was to cloak his new, autocratic power in the familiar traditions of the republic. He rejected titles like dictator or king, preferring to be called princeps, meaning first citizen. This title implied he was merely the most distinguished among equals, not a master. He meticulously maintained the republic's institutions. The Senate continued to meet and pass legislation. Magistrates, such as consuls and praetors, were still elected annually. The traditional assemblies of the people still convened. However, behind this carefully preserved facade, the real power had fundamentally shifted. Augustus ensured that he, and he alone, held the ultimate authority. Constitutional settlements, the blueprint for power. The foundation of the Principate was laid through to brilliant constitutional settlements with the Senate. The first settlement, 27 BCE, in a calculated act of political theater. Augustus appeared before the Senate and offered to resign all his extraordinary powers, restoring the Republic. In gratitude, the Senate begged him to reconsider and officially granted him proconsular authority imperium for 10 years over a huge province containing Spain, Gaul, and Syria. This was a strategic masterstroke. These were the provinces where the majority of Rome's legions were stationed, while the Senate governed peaceful territories. Augustus directly controlled the army. It was at this time they also granted him the name Augustus, meaning revered or illustrious. The second settlement, 23 BCE, a near-fatal illness in 23 BCE, prompted Augustus to refine his position. He resigned the consulship, which he had held continuously, to open the office to more senators. In its place, he was granted to immense powers. Tribunicia potestas, the power of a tribune. This gave him all the authority of a tribune of the plebs without holding the office itself. He could veto the Senate, convene popular assemblies, was personally sacrosanct. It was a capital offense to harm him. This power gave his rule a popular, legal basis. Imperium proconsular maius, greater proconsular power. This made his authority superior to that of all other provincial governors. He could now intervene in any province throughout the empire, not just his own. With these two powers, Augustus had supreme authority over both the military and the civil administration, all while holding no single office that made him a peer. To be a king, the architect of the army and state beyond the legal framework, Augustus engineered the practical machinery of the state to ensure his control. Professional army, he transformed the military from a citizen militia loyal to individual generals into a professional standing army loyal only to the emperor. Soldiers swore an oath directly to him, and he established a dedicated military treasury area militaire to guarantee their retirement pay, ensuring their dependence on him, not their immediate commanders. A new civil service, he created a burgeoning bureaucracy, drawing from the equestrian class the level below senators to manage finances, grain supply, and administration. This new class of professional administrators was loyal to him and allowed him to bypass the often unwieldy and aristocratic Senate for the day-to-day running of the empire. Rebuilding Rome, he famously claimed he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. Through massive public works projects, temples, aqueducts, forums, and theaters, he not only beautified the capital but also provided employment and reinforced a sense of a new golden age with himself as its benevolent provider. Augustus's genius was not in invention but in adaptation. He carefully selected and modified republican powers, concentrating them into his own hands while maintaining a familiar structure. He was the architect of a system that provided stability and peace. After a century of chaos, a system so well designed that it would endure for nearly 300 years, forever shaping the future of Western civilization. Chapter 8, Pax Romana, the price of peace. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was a roughly 200-year period of relative peace and stability across the Roman Empire that began with the reign of Octavian, who became the Emperor Augustus. While this era brought unprecedented prosperity and order, it came at a significant cost: the end of the Roman Republic and the loss of political freedom. The foundation of peace. After emerging as the sole victor from decades of brutal civil war, Augustus's primary goal was to restore stability. He achieved this through a series of masterful reforms that laid the foundation for the Pax, or OMANA. Military consolidation. Augustus professionalized the Roman army, transforming it from a collection of private armies loyal to individual generals into a standing, state-funded force loyal only to the emperor. He stationed the legions along the frontiers of the empire to defend against external threats and prevent internal uprisings by ambitious governors. This centralized control over the military was crucial to ending the cycle of civil wars. Political settlement. He created the Principate, political system where he held ultimate authority while maintaining the facade of the old Republic, by holding key powers like supreme military command, imperium, and the authority of a tribune. Tribunicia. Potestas. He could control the state without declaring himself a king, a title Romans despised. This restoration of the Republic was a brilliant political maneuver that pacified the senatorial class. Economic prosperity. Augustus initiated massive public works projects, building roads, aqueducts, and temples across the empire. These projects created jobs and, along with the safety of the seas from piracy and the stability of the provinces, fostered a massive expansion of trade. Goods, ideas, and people moved freely from Britain to Egypt, creating widespread prosperity. The price of peace. This long sought-after peace was not free. It was paid for with the currency of liberty and Roman blood, loss of political freedom. The most immediate price was the death of the Roman Republic. Though the Senate still met and elections were held, they were largely a formality. Real political power was concentrated in the hands of one man. The vibrant, often chaotic, political discourse and competition that had defined the Republic for centuries were extinguished. The ability of citizens to meaningfully participate in their own governance was gone, replaced by the decrees of an emperor, military expansionism, and brutality. While the heart of the empire was at peace, the frontiers were often violent. Augustus and his successors engaged in numerous brutal campaigns to expand or secure the empire's borders. The pacification of regions like Spain, the Alps, and Germany involved immense bloodshed and the subjugation of entire peoples. The peace within the empire was often bought with war on its edges, social control, and propaganda. Augustus heavily promoted a state-sponsored ideology of traditional Roman values, morality, and religion. He used art, architecture, literature, and religious cults, including the imperial cult, which deified the emperor to legitimize his rule. While this created a sense of unity, it also served as a powerful tool for social control, discouraging dissent and reinforcing the new autocratic order. The peace was conditional on accepting the authority of the Princeps. In essence, Octavian offered the Roman world a trade, their chaotic and dangerous liberty in exchange for peace and security under his absolute rule. After a century of devastating civil war, it was a price most Romans were willing to pay. Pax Romana was a golden age of prosperity and order, but it was built on the foundations of a defunct republic and the absolute authority of an emperor. Chapter 9, The Moral and Cultural Revolution. Securing his position as the undisputed leader of Rome, Octavian, now the Emperor Augustus, embarked on an ambitious and deeply personal mission to engineer a moral and cultural revolution. He believed the century of civil war had not only shattered the republic's political institutions, but it also corrupted its soul. His goal was to restore the traditional values, religious piety, and social discipline that he believed had made Rome great. The moral crusade, legislating virtue. At the heart of Augustus's revolution was a series of laws aimed at restoring traditional Roman morality, particularly within the upper classes. He saw the low birth rate among the elite, rampant adultery, and extravagant luxury as symptoms of a deep societal decay. His most famous initiatives were the Julian laws of 1817 BCE, Lex Julia de Maritandis Ordinibus, law on the marrying of the orders. This law penalized the unmarried and childless. To encourage procreation, men and women of a certain age were expected to be married. Widows and widowers were given a time limit to remarry. Political advancement and even inheritance rights could be restricted for those who failed to produce legitimate children. Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis, law on curbing adultery. This made adultery a public crime. For the first time, previously, it was a private family matter. Under the new law, a husband was required to divorce his adulterous wife and prosecute her and her lover in a special court. Punishments included financial penalties and exile to an island. In a dramatic and personal application of his own law, Augustus later exiled his own daughter, Julia, for her promiscuous behavior. These laws were highly controversial and met with significant resistance from the Roman elite, who valued their personal freedoms. However, they demonstrated Augustus's determination to use the power of the state to shape private life and social conduct. A return to the gods. Augustus firmly believed that a neglect of the gods was a primary cause of Rome's decline. A central part of his cultural revolution was a massive program of religious revival. He aimed to restore the piety and traditions of the past with himself, positioned as the nation's chief priest. His efforts included restoring temples. He famously claimed to have restored 82 temples in a single year. By rebuilding dilapidated places of worship, he made a powerful physical statement about the return of divine favor under his rule. Reviving priesthoods and rituals, he revitalized ancient priestly colleges like the Orville Brethren and reinstated forgotten religious ceremonies and festivals. The imperial cult, while he resisted being officially deified during his lifetime in Rome, he encouraged the worship of his genius, his guiding spirit, and the deified Julius Caesar in the eastern provinces. He was worshipped as a living god. This imperial cult became a powerful unifying force, linking religious piety directly with loyalty to the emperor and the state. The golden age of literature and art. Augustus was a master of propaganda and understood that culture was a powerful tool for shaping public opinion. He and his close advisor, Maecenas, became patrons to a generation of brilliant poets and writers. This era, known as the Golden Age of Latin literature, produced works that celebrated the new regime and its values. Virgil's Aeneid. This epic poem created a foundational myth for Rome, linking its origins to the Trojan hero Aeneas. It celebrated virtues like piety, pietas, and duty, subtly glorifying Augustus as the culmination of a long, divine destiny. Horace's odes. Horace's poetry often praised the traditional Roman virtues of simplicity, duty, and religious observance that Augustus was championing. Livy's History of Rome. The historian Livy wrote a monumental history of Rome from its founding, presenting heroic and moralizing tales from the past as examples for the present generation. This cultural flourishing was not just about art for art's sake. It was a state-sponsored project to create a new Roman identity, one rooted in an idealized past and centered on the values of the Augustan regime. Through laws, religion, and culture, Augustus sought to rebuild not just the city of Rome, but the character of the Roman people themselves. Chapter 10: The Imperial Family and Succession for Emperor Augustus, who had masterfully conquered the Roman world and redesigned its political structure. His greatest and most frustrating challenge was a domestic one, securing a stable succession. Having no biological sons of his own, his long reign was marked by a tragic and anxious search for a suitable heir to inherit the vast empire he had built. This quest was a drama of politics, premature deaths, and family duties centered on his immediate and extended imperial family. The imperial family. At the core of Augustus's dynastic plans were the descendants of three key people: himself, his influential wife Livia Drusilla, and his beloved sister Octavia the Younger. His only biological child was his daughter Julia, born to his second wife Scribonia. Livia, though she and Augustus had a long and devoted marriage, had two sons from her previous marriage, the capable and serious Tiberius and the popular and charismatic Drusus. It was through the strategic marriages of these children and their offspring that Augustus hoped to create and perpetuate his dynasty. A tragic search for an heir. Augustus's succession plan was not a single, consistent strategy, but a series of desperate improvisations, each one tragically undone by fate. His preference was always for an heir of his own Julian bloodline. Plan A: the nephew Marcellus. His first choice was Marcus Claudius Marcellus, the son of his sister Octavia, young, popular, and a direct blood relative. Marcellus seemed the perfect candidate. Augustus married him to his daughter Julia in 25 BCE, a clear sign of his intentions. However, the promise was cut short when Marcellus fell ill and died in 23 BCE, a devastating personal and political blow to the emperor. Plan B: the friend Agrippa. Left without an heir, Augustus turned to his oldest and most trusted friend, the brilliant general Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. He compelled the middle-aged Agrippa to divorce his wife and marry the now widowed Julia in 21 BCE. This was a practical, not a dynastic, solution. Agrippa was a reliable regent, a steady hand to manage the empire. This union proved fruitful, producing 5 children, 3 of whom were boys: Gaius Caesar, Lucius Caesar, and Agrippa Postumus. The future finally looked secure. Plan C: the grandsons. Gaius and Lucius. Augustus formally adopted his two eldest grandsons, Gaius and Lucius, while they were still infants. He doted on them and openly groomed them for power, showering them with honors and accelerating their political careers. They were named Principes Iventutus, first among the youth, and were clearly marked as the joint heirs to the Roman world. Agrippa would hold the power until the boys came of age. A tragedy struck again. Agrippa himself died in 12 BCE. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, both of the young heirs died prematurely. Lucius died of an illness in Gaul in 0 CE, and his older brother Gaius died in Lycia in 0 CE from a wound he had sustained on campaign. Augustus, now in his 60s, had outlived his two most cherished successors. The reluctant choice, Tiberius, with his direct bloodline shattered, Augustus was forced to turn to his stepson, Tiberius. Tiberius was an accomplished and proven military commander, but he was also sullen, reserved, and lacked the charisma of the other heirs. Augustus had often overlooked him, even forcing Tiberius to divorce his beloved wife Vipsania to marry Julia. After Agrippa's death, a miserable and scandalous union that ended with Julia's exile for adultery. Feeling sidelined by the rise of Gaius and Lucius, Tiberius had retreated into a self-imposed exile on the island of Rhodes for several years. But by 0 CE, with no other viable options, Augustus swallowed his pride. He officially adopted Tiberius as his son and heir, granting him the crucial powers of the Principate. Even then, Augustus hedged his bets. He forced Tiberius, in turn, to adopt his own nephew, popular and dynamic Germanicus, the son of Tiberius's late brother Drusus and Augustus's niece. The hope was that the succession would eventually pass to Germanicus, who carried Julian blood through his mother. When Augustus died in 14 CE, his long, painful, and often heartbreaking quest for a successor was finally over. The imperial power passed not to a cherished heir of his own blood, but to the 55-year-old stepson he had for so long kept at arm's length. The imperial family he had tried so hard to build had been decimated by death, and the future of his dynasty now rested on the shoulders of the reluctant emperor Tiberius. Chapter 11, The End of an Era, Augustus. The man who began his life as Gaius Octavius and ended the Roman Republic died on August 19th, 14 CE, at the age of 75. His death, which occurred in the same Rome his father had died in at Nola in southern Italy, was not just the end of a long and impactful life. It was the end of the revolutionary era that had seen Rome transform from a chaotic republic into a stable monarchical empire. The final years securing a legacy. The final 2 decades of Augustus's reign were largely a period of peace and consolidation. The bloody civil wars and proscriptions were distant memories. He had spent over 40 years as the princeps or first citizen, meticulously building the political and social framework of the principate. He had reformed the army, rebuilt the city of Rome, established a civil service, and brought a level of stability to the Pax Romana that had been unknown for a century. However, his final years were clouded by a deep personal and dynastic anxiety. Securing a successor, Augustus outlived a series of chosen heirs, including his nephew Marcellus, his close friend and general Marcus Agrippa, and his grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar. This string of personal tragedies left him with only one viable, albeit reluctant, choice: his stepson Tiberius, proven military commander but a man he had never been personally close to. In his final years, Augustus formally adopted Tiberius and shared his powers, ensuring a smooth, if not enthusiastic, transition. Have I played the part well? In the summer of 14 CE, with his health failing, Augustus traveled from Rome. On the journey, he fell ill. Knowing the end was near, he was brought to his family's old villa at Nola. His last moments were a fitting coda to a life lived on a public stage. According to the historian Suetonius, after asking his friends if he had played the part well in the comedy of life, he uttered his final public words: "Then applaud as I exit acta estate fabula." Plaudite to his wife Livia, who remained by his side. His final private words were a quiet testament to their long, complex partnership. "Livia, remember our marriage, farewell. The aftermath, a god departs, an emperor arrives." The transition of power, which had so worried Augustus, was remarkably seamless, a testament to how successfully he had remade the Roman state. A smooth succession. Tiberius, backed by the formidable Praetorian Guard, immediately assumed control. The Senate, long accustomed to Augustus's authority, quickly confirmed Tiberius's powers, officially marking the first ever succession of a Roman emperor. The system Augustus had built had proven durable. Deification. Augustus's body was carried back to Rome, and his funeral was an event of immense pomp. In accordance with a plan he had carefully laid out, the Senate officially declared him a god divus Augustus. A new imperial cult was established to worship him, cementing his status as the divine founder of the empire. This act provided a powerful religious legitimacy for his successors, who could now claim a lineage tracing back to a god. The death of Augustus marked the true end of an era because it was the moment the Roman Republic truly passed into history. For over 4 decades, he had been the singular force holding the new order together. His death was the ultimate test of his creation, when the state did not crumble, when a new emperor took power without civil war, and when his deification was accepted. It confirmed that his new system, the Principate, was no longer a temporary arrangement but a permanent reality. The revolutionary era of Octavian was over. The imperial age of Augustus's successors had begun. Chapter 12, The Shadow of Augustus. The Emperor Augustus, known as the revered father of the Roman people and the architect of a golden age, cast a long and benevolent shadow over Roman history. Yet, this image was carefully constructed, deliberately, obscuring the ruthless and calculating figure of his youth, the young Gaius Octavius or Octavian. This earlier self is the shadow of Augustus, the ambitious, a brutal warlord whose actions made the emperor's peaceful reign possible. A ruthless warlord before he was the venerable Augustus. Octavian was a key player in the bloody civil wars that destroyed the Roman Republic. His His early career was defined by a single-minded and often vicious pursuit of power. The most stark example of this was the proscriptions of the Second Triumvirate. Performing an alliance with his rivals Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus Octavian, agreed to a systematic political purge. They posted lists of their enemies, declaring them outlaws who could be hunted down and killed for reward. Their property was seized to fund the Triumvirate's armies. Octavian showed little mercy. He consented to the death of Cicero, the celebrated orator who had once supported him, and according to some sources, was even more ruthless than his fellow triumvirs in adding names to the death list. This was not the act of a benevolent statesman, but of a cold, pragmatic leader willing to eliminate any obstacle in his path. This ruthless young man, who waded through blood to secure his inheritance and political standing, was the necessary foundation for the future emperor, the master of propaganda. The transition from the warlord Octavian to the Emperor Augustus was a masterpiece of public relations. After defeating his last rival, Mark Antony, at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Octavian began the monumental task of rebranding himself. He understood that Rome would not accept another dictator. So, in 27 BCE, he staged a masterful piece of political theater by restoring the Republic. He officially returned power to the Senate, which in turn graciously granted him new powers and the new name Augustus, meaning revered one. He then spent decades cultivating his new persona, Princeps Civitatis. He called himself Princeps, or first citizen rather than king or emperor, framing himself as an equal among Romans, not their master. Pater Patriae. In 02 BCE, he was granted the title Pater Patriae, or father of his country, cementing his image as the benevolent guardian of the Roman people. Pax Romana. His reign ushered in the Pax Romana, an unprecedented era of peace and stability. He promoted this peace through art, architecture, and literature, ensuring that Romans associated him with prosperity, not the civil wars of his youth. The famous Era Passes altar of peace in Rome is a testament to this powerful propaganda. The shadow of Octavian was always there, the man who had executed his enemies and manipulated alliances. But Augustus, the master architect of the new Roman order, successfully convinced the world to focus on the magnificent structure he built, rather than the bloody ground upon which its foundations lay. The peace he created was real, but it was purchased with a ruthlessness that he later sought to erase from public memory.